You're listening to The Extra Real with Ger
and Colm Ryan for a look at the bigger picture of film.
with films from around the world,
Through the decades,
from movies you know and love.
to movies you need to discover.
This week on the show, we're going to do a retrospective of the 1976 Western, The Outlaw, Josey Wales. And this was my pick, and I forced this on you, Colm. So what did you think about it when I came to you with the suggestion?
I was interested, actually. I think one of the joys of doing this podcast is really we both have separate genres we're really interested in, separate film styles we're interested in, things like that. I suppose we're both quite big Clint Eastwood fans. I know you're a massive one. I've always loved, in Westerns, I've always loved these more revisionist style Westerns. And this definitely falls into that bracket. So I always quite enjoy these and how they look at, like, say for this film, for instance, is quite interesting in terms of the role of Indians within it. Things like that are done differently to maybe films of the past. Obviously, someone like Clint Eastwood was coming off like the Dollars trilogy and everything like that, and he is like synonymous with the Western. It's very hard to think of Clint Eastwood and not think of Westerns.
So, plot synopsis.
So, Josey Wales opens with the eponymous Josey Wales, who's like a farmer in Missouri, and he's just living his normal life. He's playing with his kid, and then out of nowhere, a bunch of Union soldiers, because this is during the times of American Civil War, led by Captain Terrell, they butcher his family, basically. And this happens within the first 2 minutes of the film. We'll talk about the opening in a minute. So they butcher his family, and a bunch of kind of outlaws from around that area visit Mr. Wales, and they're like, your family's been killed, do you want revenge, kind of thing. And then him and this bunch of outlaws, they basically go on this kind of rampage for the opening kind of 20 minutes of the film. But about towards the end of the first act, we learn that the war is over, the Civil War has ended, and these group of outlaws led by Captain Fletcher, they realize that the war is over, we should turn ourselves in, we should become free men. And when they deal with the Union leaders, this is not the case at all. The only one who doesn't turn himself in is Josey Wales, who goes on the run, and then I suppose the rest of the film kind of follows him being chased by these Union soldiers led by Captain Terrell. There's a lot more to it, but that would be kind of where it really kicks off.
Yeah, but that's essentially it. I mean, it's a chase movie after that. I've heard the film described as a prairie death wish, which I can kind of see. It's a strange film for me to talk about because, like, I came to it really, really young. I think I've watched it umpteen times, and I think what interests me about it now is I think it's the production side of things. I suppose the different influences that Clint had, where the Western was at that particular time. So, like, everyone talks about the late 70s as being the death of the Western. And we know that's not the case. It has moved on and it has transformed, and over the years, and it's found its own new lease of life. Not in the same prolific way that I think people were used to in the key periods of the formation of the genre in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And I'm not ignoring the silent era, but when it kind of really kicked back into form in the 40s and 50s, the volume was amazing, and there was a lot of TV stuff, but because of the volume being so big, there was also a lot of routine run-of-the-mill stuff. And I think, I mean, what are the things that draw you to the revisionist Westerns?
I love that they look at the roles of certain characters and how they change. I love the style of them. One thing I noticed about this one that I really enjoyed, actually, was the cinematography by Bruce Surtees, isn't it?
Yeah.
It looks pretty much like a modern film. It's got a real modern film aesthetic to it. Things like the clothing as well is very understated. it's also got it's obviously quite a bloodthirsty film. I mean, I kind of wrote it down. I've seen this somewhere that Josey Wales kills 85 people in this film.
Like, from a basic point of view, it's a hugely entertaining film, isn't it?
Oh, it's massively entertaining. One big thing about a revisionist western as well is that, Josey Wales as a person, he's not really a good guy. In a sense, he is more an anti-hero. I suppose obviously Clint would be known for that, become known for that. But it's definitely like, that kind of side of it is interesting. You're watching a serial killer on screen, basically. And yeah, as I said earlier, there was something about like the way the Indians are portrayed in that. Lomati, he's a Cherokee in it. Little Moonlight is a Navajo, and obviously Ten Bears is the leader of a troop of Comanche. So straight away you have these different style of Indians within the Western. It's not just the one style, one race of Indians and they're bad guys.
Yeah. And I think it's a perfect follow on from the 50s revisionism of the treatment of the Indians in films like Devil's Doorway and Broken Arrow. We're not just seeing stoic Indians and bad Indians side by side. We've got Indians who've got a sense of humor. I mean, we would have seen elements of that in films like Sidney Pollack's The Scalp Hunters and in Little Big Man, which is obviously where Clint Eastwood would have seen Chief Dan George. So I think what it does really well is that depiction of the Indians and giving them something a little bit more interesting. And there's some really funny scenes throughout the film, particularly with Chief Dan George and Geraldine Keames. What else did you find interesting?
Just going on from that point, this was obviously inspired by a 1972 novel by this guy called Forrest Carter, who's an ex-Klans member.
Yeah, this is something I didn't know. I mean, I knew that he'd written the book, but I didn't know of his background.
Yeah, and another thing we can talk about in a while is the original director, Philip Kaufman, was really against, I don't want this character, I want to change him completely. But Clint was very he was like, I want to kind of keep this character similar in a way. But at the same time, they do handle race relations quite evenly here. So they obviously did not take everything from that book. I'm sure it's not the greatest novel. I'm sure it's quite...
Yeah, so the novel has gone to Texas, or I think it was re-released as the Rebel Outlaw Josey Wales.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, just interesting to see something that a source novel like that probably was, not the nicest depiction of certain races and things like that, and that they kind of took it and made a Western that is a bit more even-handed.
Clint Eastwood almost did Two Mules for Sister Sarah with Bud Bedecker, but this really reminds me of times of his Ranone cycle with Randolph Scott. And at times, the character seems to feel a little bit like the characters that Scott played in that cycle of films. And I'm thinking particularly of the Ben Brigade character in Ride Lonesome. And in that film, and in Seven Men From Now, the Scott characters kind of seem to assimilate kind of a surrogate family in some way, shape or form. And also the characters are quite laconic and they don't say a whole pile, very similar to Eastwood's character here. So from that point of view, I thought it was really interesting. And also harking back to the Randolph Scott films, not in the Ranone cycle, but in Ride the High Country, with which is Sam Peckinpah, beautifully shot by Lucian Ballard. And the visuals seem to kind of tally up. They're very, very similar. So you've got that autumnal look, which apparently Clint Eastwood really likes. He likes the way the light is in the autumn. And you've got that, the varied colours of the trees and stuff like that. And you can really see that in the beginning of the film. So the opening sequences were actually shot last. As far as I know, they were shot in California. So kind of the main locations were California. I think part of it was in Arizona, but mostly Kanab, Utah but what we see is the last sequence in it. So that's kind of really interesting to me, because I feel like the film really is it's a nice appropriation of all these different elements from some of the previous westerns. But of course, yes, Clint does his own thing with them, and in a hugely entertaining way.
No, definitely. And an interesting thing you should say about the lighting, because um, obviously, background story about this was how the original director Phil Kaufman and Clint Eastwood fell out for various reasons. But there was apparently like Kaufman really liked having like attention to detail, so he was like he'd seen like a can of the shot or something like that, or a can set wrong on a shot, and he went to replace it or find the one used in an earlier shot. And as he did, Clint said to the cinematographer, he was like, "Quick, shoot this scene because we're losing light." So they shot the scene. Clint Eastwood got in his car and drove home. So by the time Kaufman came back, he was gone. But there was various rumors why they fell out. Clint Eastwood and Sandra Locke's relationship. Apparently, Kaufman was jealous of that. But this all led to Eastwood's firing Kaufman and taking over as director of the film, and that led to the Eastwood rule, which would mean that any actor or someone like that involved within a film cannot become the lit director of the film.
All right.
Yeah, so
okay.
he did hear, but apparently that rule was put in place after that.
Interesting. And like, to be honest with you, like I like Philip Kaufman, but his previous Western, The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid, is a strange film. It's got an interesting style. It seems more gritty and muddy than some of the other Westerns that were coming out around the same time. Well, actually, the 70s was, you're getting an awful lot of gritty, muddy Westerns anyway. But The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid is a strange film. Tonally, it's a bit all over the place, and a bit over the top at times. And I really like Kaufman's other films. I love his stuff from the 80s. But I'm kind of glad that Eastwood got to take over because, well, I like the film, so there you go. But also, I really like the style that Eastwood directs. It's kind of a no-nonsense element to it, and I kind of really like the way that he directs non-actors, or particularly the likes of Chief Dan George, you know. There is kind of a no frills kind of vibe off of Eastwood. It's like, should it get it done? If it's done, fine, move on. And I really like that. But I having, not comparing myself to Eastwood, but do you know when you're working with non-actors, even when you are working with actors, it's an interesting thing when his approach to asking Chief Dan George, just tell the story, don't worry about the lines of dialogue and stuff. And I think the big thing that I've learned from being on sets is keeping your team and your crew, and particularly your actors, comfortable and creating a safe environment. And it seems really evident that that's what he managed to do. I don't know if you've seen any of the making of footage, but he's just literally talking to Chief Dan George. He's like, okay, look, he's a man who's, I think he was about 76 at the time. He basically said, like, a man at that age on a horse isn't going to be able to read cue cards. He just went up to him, said, look, just tell the story. This is what's going to happen. You kind of know the lines anyway. Don't worry about it. And then just say whatever you're going to say. Just tell it like it's a story, like you're sitting around the campfire. And that's how he did it. And I mean, Chief Dan George's performance is really excellent, like, in it. He's got some of the best one-liners in it. Really amiable. He really comes out as a winner on it. Will Sampson's great too, as Ten Bears.
Yeah, he is brilliant actually. I quite enjoyed John Vernon as Fletcher, because I love his voice.
Yeah.
His voice is like that great kind of gravelly kind of voiceover style voice which he has. And he's got a great look as well. And interesting, like, it's like just people pop up that I'd seen in other things, but like Sam Bottoms as Jamie, the young kind of protege at the start. I guess he's kind of a protege.
Yeah.
Just that, like, obviously you know him from like Apocalypse Now and things like that. But it was casting wise actually. Sandra Locke, she would go on to appear with Eastwood in like 5 other films from this.
I think East anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
well, I was just thinking about her, that like her character is so strange within the film, in that you kind of know they're going to get it together, they're going to get it on, but she's so quiet. She's so quiet for like a long period of the film. She's probably in the film for like 20 minutes before she says much. And everyone talks about her as kind of strange, and you never know why. And then it's just that she's just very, very shy.
But it kind of works because you kind of it adds another dimension to to Josey at the end because he's kind of being assimilated into society. Like, these characters are usually the type of characters that are kind of on the edge and never really get fully assimilated, whereas it feels like Josey Wales is. And in the book, apparently, they get married. No, it's kind of left a little bit more open than that in the film. It is not clear cut, but it's fairly there. It's not a million miles off it.
Didn't Clint Eastwood say he didn't want them to end up together like that at the end of the film because he didn't want his characters kind of ending that way? Like, within films, he always wanted to stay as kind of the loner, I guess. And
that's, I suppose, it becomes really apparent in, I think, films like Pale Rider. Have you seen Pale Rider?
I haven't seen Pale Rider, actually. It's just about 10 years after this, right?
Yeah. Pale Rider is really interesting from the point of view. It's not in the same league, but it's very similar to Shane, and kind of follows that model. It's hugely entertaining. There's lots of action. Again, it's got a similar autumnal look. Well, it doesn't really hit any straight of greatness like this one does, or Unforgiven. It's a hugely entertaining 2 hours, and again, he's kind of playing off his High Plains drifter ghostly figure again in that. But yeah, you're quite right. Like, he's very much on the outside in most of those films.
Yeah, but there is kind of, as you said, there is moments of lightness. The scene where it looks like he might have a kind of romance with Little Moonlight, and then suddenly, obviously, Big Dan George, his character of Lone Watch, he gets in there first.
Yeah,
and there's this brilliant scene where he's kind of he wakes up in the middle of the night, Josey Wales, and he sees these 2 Indian characters like just having sex or whatever together, or at the end of it, and what does he say to him? What does Big Chief Dan George say? He says something like, I can't remember now, but he gives him such a look, and Eastwood's character, like Josey Wales' character, kind of just doesn't even say anything. I think he just has like a little reaction, but his character kind of slowly sideways moves out of the scene, and I think that happens like 2 or 3 times within the film, and it's sort of old school kind of like comedy going on, but it's kind of really funny, and it really, really works.
Even to just the witty lines of dialogue, like, when I get to liking someone, they're not around for long. And then his riposte, I notice when you get to disliking someone, they're not around for long either. Those sort of lines are great. So, and there's a sequel. Have you come across the sequel? Michael Parks made it, and it is absolutely appalling. It is not just a bad sequel, it is one of the very worst bad sequels ever made. It's on YouTube, you can check it out. It's a whopping 90 minutes. It feels ridiculously overlong after 5 minutes. It was shot on the same ranch, I think, that John Wayne bought for his Alamo Enterprise, Bracketville. It is absolutely appalling. Parks should have maybe done the reverse of the film that inspired him, and maybe hired another director to direct himself, because he's really bad. It's so poorly edited. The action is awful. It is weak on every front. I mean, I can't think of, and I mean, there have been plenty of horrible sequels to successful movies, but this is definitely one of the worst. From that point of view, I would actually recommend that you do check it out, because it's appalling.
I suppose to kind of close it off then, where would you, like, in terms of like Clint Eastwood westerns, say, this is probably one of the best? Would I be up there? Like, is it up there with the Dollars trilogy? Is it like...
Short answer, I think it's number 2 for me anyway. Like, I think it's definitely one of the most hugely entertaining of the bunch. It's got plenty of layers to it. Is it below Unforgiven? It kind of is. I think I go back to Unforgiven more and more lately. I think I came to this film so you're pretty young enough that I've seen it so many times that it kind of defies criticism a small bit. I've seen all the other films the same way as well. So, like, look, Fistful of Dollars is very good. For a Few Dollars More is great. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is great. This is great, and so is Unforgiven. Pale Rider is thereabouts, but it's not in the same league as these, or even something like Fistful of Dollars. Bronco Billy's really interesting. to watch, even though it's not a straightforward Western. But I think it has an awful lot to say about the West and the Western.
I would definitely say also this is a film to check out in terms of how to begin a story or how to tell a story within the first 5 minutes. You always see in these screenwriting books and everything, it's like once you get to like 10 pages in or 10 minutes into your film, you have to tell the story, you have to like set it up. This film starts so fast. I mean, within 2 minutes his family has been killed and he's on revenge, and he's, you know, practicing shooting in his back garden and everything, but straight away it sets up the character, and it's amazing. And that really, like, what I did love about it was like, because I don't know how structure wise it's kind of an interesting one, because it's so fast paced in ways. And then there are certain parts where, like, I'm thinking of the bit where him and Jamie are waiting for Captain Terrell and those guys on the other side of the river after they get on this makeshift kind of raft that travels back and forth to two sides of the river. And that sequence kind of goes on for, 10-12 minutes until Josey Wales shoots the raft and, knocks all the horses off. But then, you have things like that opening is super fast. Basically, the opening 20 minutes of the film is almost like a montage.
Yeah, it's really, really fast, isn't it? Like, they cut to the chase, which is good, because for me, one of the big things that I like to get straight from any film is I want to know what it's about. I need to have that information. Otherwise, they're one of the big. It's one of the big turnoffs if you don't know what's going on, particularly for a mainstream film. When your expectations are in that zone, so it does cut to the chase when he, joins up with the rebels and begins his journey for revenge, which really kicks off after they've all been betrayed. I
was going to just say, as a first time viewer, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend it to people. I mean, Clint Eastwood's 90 now and he's made a lot of films and he's starred in a lot of films, both amazing and awful.
Yes, Ger is my least favourite.
But then this is probably one of the better ones.
Thank you very much for listening. You can contact the show by emailing to extrareal@gmail.com. Search for the Extra Real Podcast on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You can listen to the show on Spotify, iTunes or anywhere you get your podcast from.